Hey everybody, welcome back to the SuperBake podcast. I'm your host, Baker. Let's talk about stuff. Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. So today I wanted to give my spoiler review for the new movie Halloween Ends, which came out October 14th on Hulu. Movie had a budget of $33 million and at the time of this recording has grossed right around $82 million. Movie was directed by David Gordon Green, who also wrote the movie. Written by Gordon Green as well as also Danny McBride, who worked with Green on the show Eastbound and Down. Movie stars Jamie Lee Curtis, of course, returning once again as Laurie Strode. Andy Matichak as Allison. Will Patton as Officer Hawkins, Rowan Campbell in the interesting role of Corey Cunningham in this movie, and James Jude Courtney, once again playing Michael Myers in this movie. Music by John Carpenter, Cody Carpenter, and Daniel Davies. So, before I go any further on this movie and my thoughts on it, I do want to just go ahead and give this warning right now. This is going to be a very spoiler-heavy review. A lot of my reviews are, but this one especially. I'm going to be talking about the ending of the movie too, because it's going to be kind of hard to articulate my feelings on this movie without talking about the ending. So if you haven't seen this yet and you don't want to know anything that happens, just consider this your warning. So, just to go over the plot briefly. So this movie takes place about 4 years after the original Halloween 2018, or also Halloween Kills, since they take place on the same night. The town of Haddonfield is still haunted by the memory of Michael Myers. We're introduced to the character of Corey Cunningham, a seemingly meek and inconsequential character. Corey has a dark past, however, and it's revealed that he accidentally killed a young kid while babysitting years ago. He tries to forget his dark past, but he's constantly plagued by the town and its citizens of his mistakes. Meanwhile, the character Laurie Strode is working on writing a memoir of her life and past encounters with Michael Myers. She is now living with her granddaughter Allison in a new house. The two are trying to recover after Michael murdered Laurie's daughter in the previous movie. Myers himself has disappeared the last 4 years with no knowledge of his whereabouts. However, after a violent encounter with some bullies, Corey runs into Michael in Haddonfield's sewers. Rather than killing the young man, Michael seems to see the same darkness in Corey as himself and decides to let him go. From there, Corey begins to go on a murderous rampage, almost seemingly possessed by the same evil that possessed Michael Myers. And Laurie must once again confront her past and her deepest fears to put a stop to the evil of Haddonfield once and for all. So, I wanted to just kind of briefly give my thoughts on the two movies that came before this one. So Halloween 2018. So the reason I want to talk about that and Halloween Kills is because they do play into this movie. They are kind of part of this newer trilogy. And these two movies came out before my podcast was around, so I was never able to do a proper review for them. So I'm just going to give my thoughts on them just initially. So the Halloween 2018, probably my favorite of the three movies that I've seen, these new recent Halloween films. I really enjoyed the 2018 movie. It pretty much ignores all of the sequels after the original Halloween that came out in 1978, and it acts as a direct sequel to that film, taking place about 40 years later. Michael Myers goes back to his brutal roots in that film. I think it does a good job of keeping the story and the characters relatively grounded, which helps make it that much scarier, at least in my opinion. It's not without its flaws. I mean, the whole side plot with the psychiatrist who'd been treating Michael and his obsession with him kind of goes off the rails at one point during the movie, but overall I thought this was a decent follow-up to the original. And I also like the ending of that movie too. Now, Halloween Kills, however, is a different story. So this film picks up pretty much immediately after the 2018 film, literally on the same night, in fact. In my opinion, while there were elements of this film that I enjoyed, such as the firefighter scene in the beginning, I thought this was a serious downgrade from the previous entry. The message about mob mentality was a little too on the nose, at least in my opinion, and the film loses a lot of what made the previous one great. Laurie's character is barely in the movie. She spends most of the runtime in the hospital, and when she does show up, she really doesn't have much to do. This movie almost makes up for its shortcomings with, some pretty brutal and bloody kills, probably some of the most brutal in the franchise. But overall, I just thought this was a somewhat entertaining but definitely very disappointing sequel. And so with that out of the way, I just want to give my initial thoughts on Halloween Ends. So I saw this movie pretty much the day after it premiered on Hulu, and I wanted to do my review of it immediately. I wanted to get it recorded and posted online. And I decided to hold off just for a little bit because I wanted to take some time to really think about the movie and just carefully consider everything that I had seen in there. Because I had heard different things about this movie. Like I had talked to a couple of my buddies about it. I had one friend who they really enjoyed it. And I had another friend who thought it was just absolute dog shit. And there didn't really seem to be a whole lot of in between. It just seemed like people either hated it or they loved it or they hated it. It would seem to be a very divisive film, is what I heard. Whereas Kills, I think, was pretty much universally hated by most people. So I really wanted to take some time and just think about this movie because initially I really did not like this movie. I thought it was objectively bad, if I'm being perfectly honest, when I first saw it. But I wanted to hold off before I posted my opinions online and just really think about it. And just because when I saw some of the positive reviews of it, I kept thinking like, okay, is there maybe something that I'm missing in this movie? So I went back, watched it again, and I gotta say, I'm glad I held off on posting my review initially of this film. However, my opinion of it has not changed too much. It's slightly better than it would have been, but not by much. So I'm just going to go ahead and say it right now. I was definitely conflicted with this movie, but I have to say overall, I think this movie is just okay. I don't think it's particularly good, and I definitely think it's got quite a few problems. And in my opinion, I think the bad outweighs the good. Not significantly, but definitely, I think there's definitely more bad things in this movie than there are good things. Which is a shame, because I feel like there are some ideas in this movie that, on their own, are interesting. However, I don't think an interesting idea, especially one that is not used effectively, makes this a good movie. And I'm going to get into that, more of the specifics of that in a little bit. But overall, my feelings of this movie, just to briefly give my thoughts before I get into the details of it, is it's okay. It's not a movie that I plan on watching again anytime soon. So, but anyways, let's just kind of get into the pros of this movie, to some of the things that I liked about it. Jamie Lee Curtis is once again really good in her role as Laurie Strode. I think she brings a lot of humanity to the character, portraying her as a tired soul just trying to live her life and forget about her dark past. I really like the scenes where, we see her confront the character Corey about his behavior. Like, we can see she seems to sense the same kind of darkness in him that she's seen before, but it's almost like her character can't quite place it. And I feel like Jamie Lee Curtis is really trying her best to give a good performance in this movie, despite, at least in my opinion, not having a whole lot to work with. Thankfully, she does have a much bigger role in this film than she did in Halloween Kills. Like I said before, she's barely in that movie. In this one, she definitely has a much bigger role. And she's got some more of a comedic side to her in this film too, which was, I guess, interesting. It is weird when you compare her to how she was in the 2018 film, just because in that movie, we see that she had been spending, 40 years basically in a bunker by herself, preparing for Michael to come after her again. So it's kind of weird that in this movie that she is suddenly kind of a happy-go-lucky grandmother. Well, I guess I shouldn't say go-lucky, but definitely feels like a huge departure from her character from where we saw her in 2018. In some ways, this movie almost kind of feels like it's in a different universe from the 2018 film. But regardless, I think she is definitely one of the highlights of this movie. And in all honesty, I would say she's probably one of the saving graces of this film. Another thing I liked about this movie, the musical score by John Carpenter. Once again, fantastic. The opening segment of this movie is really good. I love the opening segment of the last three Halloween films has probably been one of the best parts of the films. And in this one, I like how in each movie it's been a different one. Like in this one, we see the pumpkins emerging from one another, which was a cool little detail. I like that. And that's one thing I like about the opening segment with the pumpkins in this movie, is how each one's been different. So like in the first movie, in the 2018 film, the pumpkins were resurrected from rotten piles. So in my mind, that kind of implied Michael's return to evil in that movie after being locked up for decades. The reemergence of evil, essentially. In Halloween Kills, we see the pumpkins catch on fire in the opening segment, similar to the opening of the film, where, we see Michael trapped in the burning house. And then in this film, in Halloween Ends, we see each pumpkin bursting open to reveal a brand new one inside. To me, this almost seems to signify the birth of new evil, as we see Michael kind of passing the torch on to Corey's character in this movie. kinda, but I'll get into that. So yeah, I mean, I like the opening segment. The musical score is great once again. And I mean, I will say overall, like I like how they make Haddonfield more of a character in this movie too. They've done that in the last three movies. Like Haddonfield in the original movie, it just felt like just sort of a random place. I feel like it could have taken place anywhere. And here, Haddonfield definitely has its own distinct personality, I think, mainly because of the citizens we see in it. Like we see some of the survivors from the previous film in this one, like the woman that Michael Myers stabs in the neck in the last movie, which I thought she died. So I was kind of surprised to see her in this one again. In a sense, it's almost kind of like Gotham from Batman. It feels like Haddonfield is sort of like its own little unique character in this story. So I like that aspect of it for sure. But now let's get into some of the negatives about this movie. And this is kind of where I'm going to get into, pretty big spoiler territory. So as I've mentioned before, Corey Cunningham's character in the story, played by Rowan Campbell, he's introduced, he's kind of like this weird, kind of awkward character who seems pretty weak, and like everybody sort of takes advantage of him, and then he's kind of the town pariah because of what he's done. Even though what he did in the beginning of the film where he killed that kid was a complete accident, which that whole opening segment's kind of weird. I feel like there's an interesting idea there with his character. I just don't feel like the movie does a very good job with it. So I'm just going to go into it. Like, Corey's entire character arc feels like a wasted opportunity, at least in my opinion. Like, the film seems to go to great lengths to show him as a potential successor to Michael Myers. We see him transform from a feeble dork into a capable and even at times somewhat threatening figure. But his transformation, to me at least, felt pretty sudden. And I guess it would have been nice to see more of that transition, but we don't really get to see much of it. So in the movie, there's a part where he's constantly getting harassed by like these, I think they're like band kids in high school, which he's supposed to be like in his mid-20s, so at least I think he's supposed to be quite a bit older than them, so it seems kind of odd to me that he's getting like picked on by these kids, but I don't know, maybe I'm mistaken there. But there's a scene in the movie like where they attack him, beat him up, and then they basically leave him for dead near this sewer system. And Michael Myers shows up and drags him in there, and then he has him by the throat, and then we see this, what I thought was kind of one of the most interesting scenes of the movie, where Michael kind of looks into Corey's eyes, and we see sort of like, it's almost like Michael can see what Corey's done, and he kind of sees the same evil in Corey that's within him, which I thought was interesting, because it's like, okay, but Corey killed that kid by accident. I don't think he was really trying to kill that kid. I think they were trying to make the comparison between Corey killing that kid in the beginning of the movie to Michael killing his sister in the original movie. The thing is, Michael did that on purpose. This was, like, to me, more like a freak accident with Corey's character. But regardless, he lets Corey go, and then from there, Corey essentially starts to become like Michael, which that whole part was kind of weird too. But like I said, it's very sudden. It's like in the very next scene, like, because Corey's character wears glasses, and then the very next scene, he doesn't wear glasses anymore because they got smashed. And it's like, okay, I guess he doesn't need them anymore. He has a lot more cuts and scrapes on his body. He gets more beat up, and he just starts acting more violent throughout the film. And then, of course, there's this little subplot with him and Laurie's granddaughter, Allison, where Corey and Allison kind of develop a relationship with each other. Allison starts to, get a crush on him, even though she barely knows him, and he doesn't really seem like much of a charming character, at least in my opinion. It just seems kind of odd that their whole relationship would even happen. Just doesn't seem likely. But the whole lack of, like, the fact that we don't really see much of his transformation, I feel like this is further undermined when the film just kind of throws it out the window in the third act. Now, this is where I'm getting into pretty major spoiler territory. Basically, at the end of as the film goes on, Corey becomes much more violent. And there's a scene later where he actually starts to go on a murderous rampage using Michael Myers masks. And the thing is, he works at a mechanic shop, so he even has like the same kind of suit like Michael Myers wears, the mechanic suit. And so what this does to me is, like, it feels like it's kind of setting up like, oh, okay, like maybe this is how they're going to set up future films. Because the fact in this movie, like, Michael is supposed to be like a 60, 70-year-old man. So obviously he can't keep doing this forever. So maybe this is kind of their way of, like, introducing a new character who is sort of like the new pseudo Michael Myers. Same mask, same suit and everything, just a different person underneath the mask. And maybe this is how they're going to, have more sequels. But then they kind of just throw that out the window near the end of the movie, which was definitely kind of frustrating. And kind of just an interesting side thought on that. I feel like, from what I remember, I feel like Nightmare on Elm Street 2 did something similar to this, where there was like the main character, like Freddy Krueger, was trying to do the same thing with him, where I think he was trying to like possess him or something and kind of use him to become like, to get his body back, I think. I could be completely wrong. It's been a long time since I've seen that movie. But yeah, like Corey's whole character arc in this movie felt very flat to me. And again, it doesn't help that the character himself is not particularly interesting. I don't necessarily want to blame the actor, Campbell, for that. I think he does the best he can with what he's got, but it's just, I don't think the character is particularly engaging enough. I don't know, it would have been nice to see more of his transformation in the movie if you're going to go down that route, which of course they chose not to, and I'll get into that here in a little bit. So another thing that I didn't like about this movie is that there were some scenes in this movie that were, at least in my opinion, unintentionally funny. Several kills in this movie were definitely brutal, almost to the point of being comical. So like one major criticism I have of these latest films is that I think they miss some of what made Michael Myers so scary in the original movie. So in the first film, Michael was strong and brutal, but he wasn't over the top with his kills. Like we would see him display his immense strength briefly, such as pinning someone to a wall with a knife, which they also do in this movie, I guess as sort of a callback to the original. But there was more subtlety to his kills in the original movie, and I think that these ones lack this. It almost feels like the filmmakers were trying too hard to showcase just how powerful Michael is. In Kills and Ends, for example, Michael dispatches his victims with almost cartoony violence. Like there's a scene in this movie and in Kills where we see Michael literally stomp someone's head in, and it just, for some reason, it makes me laugh every time I see it. There's another scene in this movie like where we see Corey kill this, like it's a radio station DJ, and he kills him by smashing his face on a record player. And then later we see like the guy's tongue is on the record, and it's causing the thing to scratch because it keeps going over his tongue, and it causes it to skip. And it's like, is this supposed to be funny? Because I found myself cracking up at this. I don't know if that just shows how sick in the head I am, but like, I don't know. Just for me, I don't feel like I should be laughing at a Halloween film. Even though I laughed at the Rob Zombie movies, but that's because I thought those movies were silly. But so another thing I noted about this movie too is that and then this kind of goes back to what I was saying before about Corey's character, and it kind of feeling like a wasted opportunity. It seems like the writers in this film just couldn't figure out what direction they wanted the story to go in. So I mentioned before that the main premise of the story seems to be that Michael sees a similar darkness in Corey's character, and so he lets him live in order to see him slaughter the citizens of Haddonfield. So Corey does start to do this, and he gives into his own internal darkness, but it's very sudden, and it's also short-lived in my opinion. So near the end of the movie, Corey has a big confrontation with Laurie Strode's character, and he's quickly taken out by Michael. I kept thinking that maybe his character was going to explain how they could continue the future installments of the franchise with a younger version of Michael Myers running around like I kind of talked about before. There's even a line from Laurie earlier when she's writing her memoir saying something along the lines of, "Evil never really dies, it just changes shape." So I kind of interpreted this to mean that perhaps the evil within Michael was losing strength, so it was going to change into Corey. To me, that would have fit the overall theme of these films seem to be going for. In Halloween Kills, the writers seem to imply that Michael's influence could easily infect people and cause them to do terrible things, like commit murder. We saw that with the mob when they viciously tried to kill a person they thought was Myers, but it turned out it was just another escapee from the same mental institution that he was in. This would have been an interesting idea to explore, but the movie just kind of drops that idea near the end, and Michael turns out to be the big bad villain once again. I just wish they could have picked a theme and stuck with it. It felt like they had two different ideas and couldn't decide on which one they wanted to go with, so they sort of tried both, and neither really worked. And that's the other thing that kind of hurts this movie too, is the fact that Michael is barely in it. Like, I still don't, like, it's, like in this movie, we don't really see him until probably like a good, I don't know, like hour into the movie, when Corey encounters him in the sewers. And then from there, we don't really see much of him again until towards the end of the movie when he starts to come back. And the other reason why it seemed like they lost interest in Corey's story, or at least they threw that idea out the window at the last minute, was because there's a scene in the movie where we see that Michael appears to be losing strength. When he takes out his first victim, it's a cop that follows Corey in there. And the guy actually, for a brief second, overpowers Michael. And then Corey has to kind of step in and help him kill the guy. And there's even a scene later on where Corey is actually able to overpower Michael and take his mask away from him. Again, two examples in this movie of Michael seemingly losing his strength, which seem to feed into the idea that maybe this is Michael's way of leaving his work to Corey, I guess, in a way. But then they throw it away in the last act of the movie when Corey gets taken out. And then we have another Laurie Strode versus Michael Myers fight in the last few minutes of the film. And also, too, just on that note, the scene when Corey takes Michael's mask away from him, another example in the movie where I found myself laughing where I don't think I was supposed to be. It was just like, because he's so much smaller than Michael, like the actor that plays Michael Courtney, he's like, 6'2", 6'3" in real life, and I think the guy that plays Corey is not really that tall. So it just looked like a little kid trying to wrestle his dad, and for some reason I just kept laughing at that scene. It just makes me laugh every time I see it. And I don't think it's supposed to be funny. But yeah. And on that note, there's something else I wanted to discuss was Michael Myers himself. So I still don't quite understand a couple of scenes with him in this movie. Such as I mentioned before, the scene with the cop, and we see Michael, it looks like he's weak, and he has to have Corey come to his aid to help him kill the cop. So I thought the implication in there was that he was losing strength and he needed Corey's help because he wasn't strong enough to continue his killing spree. But then later on, we see Michael easily pick up a person with one hand and then pin them to the wall with his knife. Again, a callback to the original 1978 film. But then after that, he's weak again because we see Corey wrestle his mask away. And like I said, that other scene that I thought was pretty funny. I guess I just didn't quite understand what the writers were going for with this. Is Michael the threat? Or is it Corey? Or are both of them the threat? It seemed like another example of them not quite knowing what they wanted to do with these two characters. Like, who is the focus here? Because it seems like it's Corey throughout the majority of the runtime. There's even a kind of interesting scene in the movie where we see them both work together to take out this douchebag doctor that Allison's character works for. Because she's a nurse in this movie who's trying to get this promotion, and then there's this asshole doctor that she works for who gives the promotion to this other nurse that we find out later, unsurprisingly, that he's, banging in his house. And then we see, Corey and Michael basically break in and kill both of them, which was kind of an interesting scene. It was like, we see Corey, who's like an amateur who kind of gets hurt trying to take one of the nurse out because she slams the door on his hand. He's kind of the amateur, and then Michael is kind of the pro, kind of showing him how it's done. And that was an interesting scene, but we really only get that one scene with those two together. But it was like, oh, okay, well, I can kind of get behind this. But then again, like I said, they sort of dropped that idea. There's a lot of that in this movie. I feel like there's a lot of ideas in this movie that just kind of get dropped. And that's another problem that I have with it. And then, of course, my other major issue with this movie, and this is where I'm going to give my major spoiler warning, because I'm going to be talking about the ending of the movie. So the very end of the movie was another letdown for me. So, as mentioned before, Laurie has one final battle with Michael at the end of the movie. And it ends with Michael essentially pinned to a table with knives and a fridge that she knocks on him. Don't question it, just go with it. I'm not questioning it at this point. Laurie and Allison essentially kill him, avenging, Laurie's daughter's, Karen's, death. The cops then show up and the entire town has kind of a weird pseudo-funeral procession for Michael's body, which was really weird because it's like, they all just kind of come out of their houses and they just sort of know that this is for Michael. I guess it's kind of their way of ridding themselves of the evil that's been haunting them for a long time. But then they basically take Michael's body to like this warehouse. I think it's like the mechanic shop where Corey was working, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong about that. And they throw his body into an industrial shredder. So the film basically ends with Allison finally moving out of Haddonfield and Laurie rekindling her romance with Officer Hawkins and finally putting her fears to rest. So I feel like this ending lacked the punch it should have had. At the very least, when Laurie finally unmasked Michael, it would have been cool to finally actually see her monster face to face. And we don't see it. I'm okay with the fact that we don't really ever see Michael's face clearly. We get little glimpses of it throughout these last three movies, but we never see it clearly. But it should have been a way bigger moment, in my opinion, for Laurie's character. Even once it's all said and done, the ending feels kind of cheap. It's like by the end I was just sort of ready for it to be over. Even Laurie's last scene in the movie feels lacking. She talks about going to see the cherry blossoms in Japan with Hawkins, and we see the beginning of a happy life ahead of her, but the film just lacks any emotion or weight behind it. And considering the turmoil that we've seen her go through because of the evil that's haunted her, I just really wanted to see a better send-off for her character. And the fact that they actually show Michael getting crushed by the industrial shredder to me was, again, kind of silly because it's just so brutal and over the top watching him get crushed by that thing. I mean, they don't pull any punches in this movie. You see a lot of the gore in it. I mean, if nothing else, if you're a fan of gore and scary movies, I guess these three movies will definitely deliver that to you in spades. But yeah, I like the ending of 2018 for a couple reasons, and I think I'm just going to kind of go on a little bit of my own little tangent here. I think that these films should have ended on 2018. The reason why is because to me that movie felt like a nice closing chapter for Laurie Strode's character. We finally got to see what she was doing after all these years of facing Michael Myers in the original movie. We see her finally put her fears of Michael to rest, face her demons, face her dark past. She traps Michael in the burning house. And the nice thing about that is we don't actually ever see Michael die in that movie. We don't see him burn to death. But he is trapped in there. Like, she traps him in the basement, and there's really nowhere for him to go. And then she escapes with her daughter and granddaughter. And what I like about that is it's open-ended enough because Michael probably could have escaped if he wanted to, but we don't know. We don't know where he's at. Did he escape? Did he perish in the flames? It's completely left open to interpretation for the viewer. But the point is, Laurie's character has like that closure. She's finally faced the boogeyman and she's defeated him, and that I think would have been a nice closing chapter for her character arc. And then we get to Halloween Kills, which completely undermines a lot of what was done in that movie. And Halloween Ends just feels like it's trying to fix a lot of the mess that Halloween Kills created, and I just feel like it doesn't do that. The stuff with Corey's character is interesting. I just wish they pursued it more, and that's the biggest problem that I have with this movie. So supposedly, I read that David Gordon Green and Danny McBride, when they originally wrote 2018, I think they only had enough material for maybe 1 or 2 movies. But because of the success of the 2018 film, they decided to make 2 more movies because it's Hollywood, it's a business, they got to make money. I also heard that apparently when they were filming when they started production in 2019, it was like right around the end of 2019, that was when COVID hit, and I think they had to go in and rework a lot of the stuff for this movie when they came back and started working on it again and filming, I think, earlier this year. I think they filmed it like in early 2022. So I'm kind of curious, like, what impact the pandemic had on the production, because supposedly they had a very different idea in mind for the story. So I'm kind of curious, like, what changed between then and now. But honestly, I kind of wish they just ended it at the 2018 film. I think that would have been a fine ending for the series. 2018, the Halloween 2018, obviously not without its flaws, but I definitely think it's much superior to Kills and Ends. But regardless. As far as my overall thoughts for this movie, I can't honestly say that I hated this film, but I was definitely a little disappointed by it. As a film that is supposed to mark Jamie Lee Curtis's final performance in the Halloween franchise, this felt somewhat lacking. And it's a shame because I really wanted to love this movie, but I just think it's just kind of okay. I gave it the benefit of the doubt despite my reservations about after seeing Halloween Kills, but unfortunately, this just didn't stick the landing for me. The story felt like it was all over the place, and the writers couldn't quite decide where they wanted to go with it. There are some entertaining kills in this movie, and some little details in it that I didn't quite catch the first time that I appreciated going back and watching it again. But some of the kills in this movie and some of the stuff that happens they're so weird that they border on being silly. But in my opinion, that just doesn't stop it from being subpar, in my opinion. Michael Myers, he is intimidating as always, but he's absent for a good portion of the runtime, and the movie definitely suffers for it. At least I thought it did. Kind of interesting because Laurie was absent for a lot of Halloween Kills, and I think the movie suffered because of that. And this movie, Michael Myers is not in a lot of the movie, and I think that the quality goes down because of it. The supporting cast, they all do a decent job with their respective roles, but there's just not much for them to do. Jamie Lee Curtis does her best with what she's given, and she's probably the best part of the film. I would argue the saving grace, but I hate that this is the note that she ends on in this iconic movie franchise. I feel like there was an interesting idea or two lost somewhere in the plot, and it just never quite made it to the surface. I can't help but wonder how this would have turned out had had Danny McBride and David Gordon Green stuck with the initial plan of this movie. Maybe it's, to make it just one or maybe just two movies like they originally wanted to do. Maybe it still would have ended on Halloween Kills, or we might have gotten something completely different. Who knows? Regardless, there appear to be several ideas in this movie that just don't mesh well together. If you're a diehard fan of the franchise, I mean, you might like this movie, although you might be a little bit thrown off and potentially even upset at the lack of Michael Myers. But yeah, for my personal opinion, though, I just wanted more of a bigger send-off for Michael Myers and Laurie Strode. So yeah, for me, this movie, not particularly bad, not particularly good, just kind of okay. But yeah, watch it for yourself, come to your own conclusions, and let me know what you guys think. Okay, well, I think I've talked long enough. I've talked for this about 30 minutes, so yeah, normally I would have another segment to talk about, but I think I'm going to go ahead and stop it there. All right, guys, well, hope you enjoyed the show. Once again, I am on Anchor, Spotify, and YouTube. Feel free to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you guys next time. Later.